Welcome to our second episode of Tiny Talk, our little radio show about Tiny D6 from Gallant Games. I'm Alan Bahr, lead designer and owner of Gallant Games, and we're going to answer some questions. So these questions have been asked in our Facebook group, on our Patreon, social media, in the comments, wherever you'd like. You're welcome to ask any questions about Tiny D6. Think of this as a sort of bi-weekly 15-minute GM advice column, kind of just to answer questions or, whatever you really want to know about Tiny D6. So we're going to start with some questions from the Facebook group. And I believe these were from Zach Wolf. If I'm wrong, I apologize. But I don't have it open at the moment. So let me look at my notes. Okay, so the first question that was asked was, how often do you run Tiny D6 for fun? Not as much as I used to. It gets hard to run work for fun. But I run Tiny Supers a lot. I do like Tiny Supers the most, and I tend to run it the most. Do you have a favorite setting? The Gallant verse, related to my previous answer, probably. That's really the only house setting we have. So yeah, there's that. These are really boring answers. I'm sorry. Is there an IP you wish you could do? That is a big question and a hard one. Is there an IP I wish I could do? I mean, I would love to work on stuff related to books I like. I love David Gemmell books, so a Trinari RPG would be high on my list. I love The Wheel of Time, and that would be high on my list. That, maybe? I mean, I've worked on a lot of IPs for other companies, so, and we own a bunch of our own, so, yeah, I don't know. I haven't really thought about it super hard. I kind of checked all the boxes off my list in some ways. We get a happy 5-year anniversary. So today is the 5th year, or the 5-year anniversary, the 5th yearly anniversary of when Gallant Games ran and launched its very first Kickstarter for Tiny Frontiers. So that was 5 years ago in 2016. So auspicious second episode, hopefully. And thanks for the kind words. It's really appreciated. So if you have any questions about Tiny D6, drop them in the comments. I'm about to dive into a big one we got in the Tiny D6 fan group, which is not a Gallant Games official fan group, but it is one of the Tiny D6 fan groups. And somebody asked a question about opposed tests or versus contests, whatever you want to call it. So to set up an example, let's say we have a character with the stealthy trait, gives advantage on stealth tests. We have a character with the perceptive trait, gives advantage on perceptive tests. And how do those interact? Because Tiny D6 doesn't posit rules for opposed tests, which makes it a little harder. So let's talk about that. So in this idea of an opposed test, we are discussing two characters specifically. However, this can be applied to NPCs or non-player entities in the game. So there are 3 ways. These answers are quote unquote unofficial. The game doesn't posit any mechanical framework or solutions for this. So do with that what you will is the first answer. But in my home table, in my home games, and when people ask me, I kind of push 3 narratives. So first, if it's a player versus a non-player, the players thing just takes precedence, and that's it. Let's just move on. The players are designed to feel competent in Tiny D6, to feel like they should always be able to take advantage of their traits unless there's an extreme circumstance that imposes disadvantage. So generally speaking, player versus non-player, just player's trait takes the advantage, and let's call it good. If you've got... The second answer is when I post. I apologize. When I posted before, and mentioned before, and it is a little crunchier than I like, which is why it's not an official answer. But generally speaking, you compare. So, for example, if player has no traits that relate to sneaking, and they're trying to sneak past somebody with the perceptive trait, you could just impose disadvantage on the sneaking player and be done with it. A trait opposing somebody who doesn't have a trait either just gains precedence or imposes disadvantage on the actor. And it depends where you're orienting the perception of this action from. If the person without the trait is initiating the action and the person opposing them has a trait that grants advantage in the related scenario, you can just give disadvantage and be done with it. If the person with advantage is trying to do it and the person without advantage is the resisting party in this scenario, you would just, you could say your advantage trumps, and that's that. Or you could say their advantage is going to give the resistor disadvantage and be done with it and not have the other person roll. A part of this is complicated by the design of Tiny D6, which is a quick binary resolution. You roll, you know what happens, you move on. And opposed rolls don't really work in some ways because parties can be successful in both ways. And it just kind of happens. And then the third solution, and the one I default to when I am running the game, is first, I try to encourage players not to oppose each other. Generally speaking, I don't feel it adds fun to the game, and it can be resolved narratively. So I tend to say, just talk it out, don't roll. But if push comes to shove and we have to roll, my rule is this. I tend to say the person acting is the one starting the conversation. So if I have perceptive and I'm trying to detect somebody sneaking, I start with advantage. The person who is the resisting party, the person doing the sneaking in this example, then modifies based on their trait. And they both roll, and so they would both have advantage. They both roll. If one is successful and one is not, everything is resolved, right? If both are successful, I try to create a narrative blend of the two, where yes, you detect them. In this case, I'm perceptive. I saw you sneaking, but maybe I didn't realize who you were, right? A success with a cost. And maybe the person sneaking does sneak past me, but they drop something that is a clue down the road. And as a GM, that's what I try to do. And that's a lot more work on me as the GM. And there are a lot of options we could present, but again, the mechanical framework of Tiny D6 tends to want to be resolved and done. So to recap, if one is a player and one is not, just use the player stuff and move on. If both are players and one has a trait and one doesn't, impose disadvantage on the one without the trait and have them orient the test. If they both have traits that relate, work to create a hybrid solution that allows them both to roll and succeed, and then meld the results with a success with a cost sort of setup. Those are the three sort of options that are the easiest to utilize. And obviously, my personal GM advice would be, if your players are in a situation where they're opposing each other, it's probably not good for the group health in the long run. Generally a warning sign of bad things to come, in my experience, having run a lot of games. So, but that's not every group. You know your group better than I do. So it's kind of your decision how you want to educate that and how to resolve that. That was a big topic. I hope that helps and makes some sense. If you have questions or comments or follow-up, feel free to dump them in the comments on the YouTube page where this will be archived for the foreseeable future. And we'll kind of roll from there with those. If you're on Patreon or in our Discord, you can kind of dump it there too. So Joe McGee says, this explanation would be super awesome in an upcoming Tiny Zine. That's a good point, and one I certainly had not, wink, wink, considered. But stay tuned if you're a Patreon when you get the first look at the next two Tiny Zines for March and April. All right. We have another question from Joe. Joe asks, will Magnum and some of the other smaller books ever be available as POD on drive-thru? I assume Joe is referring to Magnum Vice Fury Force. I don't know what other smaller books Joe is referring to. Most of them are on drive-thru already. Magnum Vice Fury Force got taken down about 2 years ago. It was one of the early Tiny D6 designs. Some of the content is no longer what I want to present in terms of quality. And so we want to redo it, and I didn't feel like letting it stand there until that was done, basically. So at some point we will do Magnum Vice Fury Force 2, the Re-Bisoning, or some ridiculous subtitle I'll come up with. So I hope that kind of gives an answer to that. So it will come back at some point. It was previously on there live in POD, and there are people who actually have it in POD, but it's always really hard to say. So one day it will be back, and you can do it, and it will be exciting. The next question, Tom Ryan. Any chance of a Tiny86 campaign a la Pathfinder monthly adventures? Yes and no. Adventures generally are among the worst sellers in the RPG space, at least in my experience as a product manager for other companies and at Gallant Games. Our adventures just don't do well. And that's true of regardless of 96, that's just my experience. And part of that is an adventure is only selling to a GM, which is already a subset of the player base buying product. And not every GM wants to run pre-made adventure, so you're already slicing that farther down. So the economics are rough. That being said, obviously some people, Paizo with their Pathfinder Adventure Pass, are fantastically successful. And I would love to be able to do that. The best way to get that to happen would be to be on the Patreon. And I would love to roll something into TinyZine on an ongoing basis, which is probably the platform we take because TinyZine is funded by Patreon. And it kind of makes the most sense rather than doing a separate production. But it's hard to say. I would love to do it, but the logistics of being a small company, I have to focus on stuff that both pays the bills and allows me to make future product. And adventures, well, they do okay, and they're great for getting people into the game on a supplemental level. They aren't going to pay the bills, and so it makes it hard for me to put the time into them. I would love to write a mega dungeon style mega campaign at some point for Tiny86. That would be high on my list, but I don't know if we'll ever get to it. So if you would like to see that stuff, leave a comment. Again, our Patreon is one of the best places to help see that come to fruition. You can find our Patreon at patreon.com/gallantnightgames. That green right there really clashes with the blue and is not working for me. So we're going to have to adjust that at some point because yikes. But it makes it easy to see. So, that's the best way to help that happen is Patreon. All right. So I think we're getting close to the end here. I've got all the questions that I was given in advance. I've got the questions that popped up in our chat as we were going. But, it's our 5-year anniversary. We should do something. We should show something cool. We should say something fun. What should we say? What should we show? What kind of preview thing would I like to show you all? Oh, no. Let's see. But what if I showed you this? What if I showed you? Oh, now, of course, now that I've leading up to this, it's not working. What if I showed you one of the cool things we have coming soon that you might like? I'm going to do that now that I've got this set up. I had this all worked out, and now I'm flubbing it, but here we go. What? Look at that. How cool is that? So Beach Patrol is one of our more ridiculous games. And it got its first edition in 2019, which is great. But it's a small 40-page book. And I would love to do something that we can have a little more content to it rather than just the rule set. So we are working on Beach Patrol, the Summer Barbecue Edition, obviously. It has a lot more art by Nick, including the special cover. It will have expanded content, including Beach Patrol Adventures. The rule set will still be in there. Obviously, it'll be a self-contained book. But we're going to have things like recipes for barbecuing with your game group. How to do that. All kinds of fun stuff that make it kind of a whimsical, exciting little book. So stay tuned for news on that. And we'll get to that soon. All right. So we are 15 minutes into this, which is our limit for Tiny Talk because it is tiny. It's minimalist. It's to the point. I don't have a good tagline, so we'll work on that. All right, folks. Thank you for jumping in. Thank you for chatting. Thank you for asking questions. And as always, thank you for supporting Gallant Games over the last 5 years, both fiscally, but also by being one of the best communities I've ever been a part of. You folks make this worth doing when it's hard. And the encouragement on an emotional, mental, and communal level is something I couldn't do this without. And I am grateful every day for the awesome community, both the Tiny D6 and the Gallant Games community in general. They've both been fantastic. And so I just, from the bottom of my heart, and I know if Erin were here, she would echo that, we want to say thank you for allowing Gallant Games to become what it has. So until 2 weeks from now, every other week, we'll have our next Tiny Talk, episode 3. Thanks, folks. Have a good one.